Early figure painting, the Han, 6 dynasties and Tang period, dated to 2nd century to 9th century AD. I, Dr. Rita Pratap, former head of the department, Drawing and Painting, University of Rajasthan. Throughout the history of Chinese painting in the beginning and also in the end, the line drawings of brush remained its central fact. The earliest surviving examples of the true figure paintings in China are 2 fragments of silk dated around 3rd century BC, were excavated from tombs of Changsha. During Han and 6 dynasties period, Hu Kai-chi was famous for his figure paintings. Then was Zhang Shengyu. During Tang period, Wang Wei, Wu Taozu, Zheng Husan and Chou Fang were famous figure painters of time. Throughout the history of Chinese painting, in the beginning and also in the end, the line drawn by brush remained its central fact. Around the year AD 100, the author of the Shu Wen, the first Chinese dictionary, wrote, "To paint is to draw boundaries." He explains the character for Hua, to paint, as representing a hand grasping a marker and drawing the 4 boundaries of a field. That is to say, delineating a field. 16 centuries later, the great individualistic painter Tao Chi opened his theoretical treatise by speaking of the single brush stroke as the origin of all existence, the root of the myriad phenomena. One might almost without violating the sense translate, in the beginning was the brush stroke. Painting began in Europe also as an art of line, but lost its liner characters as painters turned their attention from outlines to radiation of light and shadow, mass and texture, softening or obscuring contours, and so lessening the importance of line. The course of Chinese painting led in a different direction. Its artists never so concerned with reproducing faithfully the color and texture of surface or the corporeality of mass, gave ever greater emphasis to the brush line itself, taking it as their primary descriptive and expressive means. The earliest surviving examples of true figure paintings in China are on 2 fragments of silk dating around 3rd century BC, which were excavated from the tombs at Changsha in present-day Hunan province. The pictures, drawn in fine black ink brush line with flat washes of color filling the areas thus bounded, exemplify already the technique and even something of the style that was to remain basic and orthodox for many centuries. They are symbolic representations of humans, demons, animals and plants, set off as separate images by their outlines from the neutral silk ground. This ancient mode of representation corresponds to an even more ancient mode of thought, in which images, Xiang, played an important role as abstractions of natural phenomena. Objects and aspects of the world isolated from context and conceptualized The characters of the written language in their earliest form as pictograms were images of one kind. Another was exemplified by the hexagrams of the ancient divination text known as the Book of Changes, thought to be derived from the visual patterns of the physical universe. The forms created by the painter were still another. When composed into a scene, they were juxtaposed without being integrated. Between and around them was a void space, had no existence except as that which separated one image from another. The figures painted on a tomb tile is painted by an anonymous artist. It is ink and colors on clay surfaces dated to 2nd or 3rd century AD and at present in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Still stand isolated against an amorphous ground. Here, the artist has discovered two means of unifying his picture. Through suggested movement, the figures seeming to be swayed by a common cadence, and through the mutual awareness revealed in the exchange of glances that binds them, as also one of the chief criteria of excellence in Chinese painting throughout its history is the quality of brushline, in which speed and flexibility of the brush are expressed. And the brushstroke has become a means of defining character. The three-quarter view is skillfully used. The whole attitude and pose of each figure conveys something of the psychology of the person portrayed. The patient listener, the rather pompous talker, and the decorous and patient man waiting to get a word. In so also one can notice the skillful handling of the figure in three-quarter back view, who appears to be turning to the left within the shallow space. At the same time, the placement of the figure in space is primitive. One can observe the great progress seen toward the use of brush in a typical Chinese manner. Another artist of the Han and 6th dynasty period, whose name is attached to any surviving pictures of real antiquity, however, is Ku Kai-chi, who was born around 345 AD. He was attached to one of the important courts of the south. He was not only famous for his paintings but also for his eccentric speech and behavior. His contemporaries created him with preeminence in three fields: wit, painting, and foolishness. The earliest and finest of the paintings attributed to him is section of a hand scroll, ink and colors on silk, and at present in the British Museum, London, titled Admonitions to the Court Ladies. Belongs to that didactic kind of painting favored by the early Confucianists, illustrating a 4th century moralizing text which is made up of advice on matters of department delivered to ladies of the imperial harem by the court preceptors. The passage of text that precedes the 9th picture of the scroll contains words: "No one can endlessly please. Affection cannot be for one alone. If it be so, it will one day end in disgust." A graceful court lady appears to be learning this bitter truth as the emperor repulses her with a gesture. The long bands of cloth fluttering from her clothing as if blown by the wind or agitated by rapid movement are later echoes to the swift liner plays used in Han Dynasty drawings to impart a sense of vitality to the picture. The painting is in the form of a hand scroll or horizontal scroll, which is designed to be unrolled section by section in such a way that no more than 2 feet or so is seen at a time. The material and technique are the usual ones for the early period: fine drawing in ink line and washes of watercolor on silk. Scroll of the distinguished ladies ascribed to Ku Kai-chi. This is also ink and paint on silk. It is a horizontal scroll and at present in the Beijing Palace Museum collection. The pictures are based on a literary text, as the standing figure shows rulers and the ladies who are to be regarded as exemplary characters. The style of this early didactic narrative painting is notable for isolation of the figures in the composition and for the natural color and the flowing style of the contour painting. Thus, the admonition scroll explicitly sets out to illustrate a didactic text, a series of written injunctions for court ladies, each illustrated by figure relevant to the text. In both scrolls, the figure paintings illustrates real or fictional events. The painting is in several colors chosen to suit the subject, filling in the black ink outlines, and the same method is used in the scroll of distinguished ladies, probably based on 1st century text. Biographies of distinguished ladies by Liang. From the Eastern Han period is found a stone relief painted with hunting scenes, man on horse aiming bow and arrows on the running deers. The lower area has processions of chariots and horsemen. The work combines both bas relief and painting. At present, this stone relief that is painted door lintel is in Hebei Archaeological Museum. Fragment of a stamped brick from a tomb. This stamped brick shows Queen Mother of the West seated on a throne in the shape of a tiger and with 4 accompanying figures: the fox, the hare with the herb of immortality, the toad of the moon, and the raven. Here one can notice the form of figure drawing prevalent during the Han period. Scroll of 100 horses, Tang period, influenced by Han Khan. It is ink and paint on silk and at present in the Beijing Palace Museum. This picture by an unknown artist reflects the life of grooms and the horses in their care, portraying the liveliness of the horses themselves and their activities involved in workshop with them. Its composition traces a success of events. First, the horse is untied and washed, then its place is fed and groomed, and finally 2 caparisoned animals clearly marks the end of the pictorial score, their heads pointing back to its beginning. Lady with Servants, Chou Fang, second half of 8th century AD, ink and paint on silk, horizontal scroll, and at present in the Beijing Palace Museum. This scroll shows servants and ladies on a hot summer day busy with various occupations around a high-born lady. The portrait of the seated lady, full front, makes it clear that she is the chief personage. All the other figures are intent on what they are doing. Their eyes are either lowered or directed towards the mistress. Although she does not tower her retinue, the painter clearly and ingeniously indicates her position in the group by allowing her direct eye contact with the viewer of the picture. She is also the only woman in the scene who has no occupation but simply being fanned by a servant, and she wears the most expensive clothing and the finest headdress. The ladies have opulent figures and round faces. They wear flowing robes and their hair is dressed high. The furniture shown here is typical of Tang period. A carpet, stools and low tables, since people still usually sat on the floor. Garden with literati Wen Yuan II, Han Yuan, dated to 723 to 787 AD. It is also ink and paint on silk and at present in the Beijing Palace Museum. Han Huang came from Chang'an and was famous for rural genre scenes and figure paintings. In the painting, 4 literati are shown in a garden with partly withered pine tree and some rocks. A servant is shown making some important preparations for the scholar's occupation. He is rubbing ink for them. The scholars with their staff, winged caps, stand out from the surface of the picture. Portrait of the 8th Liu Han ascribed to Liang. It is ink and paint on silk and at present in the Beijing Palace Museum. This is one of the series of 6 extant pictures, though there were once 18 paintings of Liu Han. Here the aim was to portray the historical character, the religious pupil, the Liu Han. The figures are surrounded by striking details such as furniture, scholars offering gifts and miniature landscape. But the mood is conveyed chiefly by the faces of the Liu Han. The curtain to themselves show monks enveloped in simple, much mended robes. It is said that Liang was a pupil of Wu Taozu, who painted temple walls, and religious pupil the Liu Han. The repeated depiction of figure in consecutive scene is typical of the narrative character of early horizontal scrolls, as in the nymph of the Low River, attributed to Ku Kai Chi. This is also ink and paint on silk and at present in the Beijing Palace Museum. This is one of the 3 such scrolls, the others being in the Liaoning Provincial Museum, Shenyang, and Freer Gallery of Art, Washington. They illustrate in which horizontal Chinese scrolls were viewed. The picture is over 5 meters, 16.4 feet long, but a mere 30 centimeters, that is 11.8 inches in height, and is unrolled by the viewer like a film. As his left hand unrolls it up again, only a section the width of the distance between his arms is visible. The way of viewing a horizontal Chinese scroll shows that it was read from right to left, a feature that is reflected in the composition of a picture as a whole. The direction in which the figures are looking guides the viewer through the picture, and elements such as bird apparently flying out of one scene into another link them together. The structure includes steep mountains or dense stands of trees for purposes of demarcation. The narrative axis is also the pictorial axis. Figures clearly relate to each other as they communicate or look in the same direction, and the viewer can follow the story through its composition along the axis of the picture. The real and imaginary worlds are kept apart. Supernatural beings have ribbons wafting around them, sometimes hover in the air, while people in the real world are literally earthbound. The scholar poet Cao Chi and his retinue always have solid ground under their feet. The landscape background continually unfolding behind the narrative axis appears stylized, but there are differences between the trees. Association suggests that one many may be a mallow and another a pine. Simple triangular and round-topped mountains, some cover with trees, separate one scene from the next. In this painting, the artist enriches the composition both by showing the relationship of the figure and by adding landscape feature to the structure. It is like a film unrolling before the viewer's eye. The scroll depicts the chronological sequence of events from the original literary text and is thus a continuum of time, although not of place. The outlines of the figures and the internal contours of folds, hunting bows, and loops of ribbon convey an impression of lavish abundance even without light and shade to give depth. Different colors are used to represent different fabrics, although the actual of the fabrics is not suggested by the painting. Chou's figures, the main actor in the narrative and subsidiary actors, are shown as types, finely robed courtiers, concubines, and group of spectators. Their faces may have different expressions, but they cannot be regarded as portraits. Tomb of Wang Chu-chi, late Liang dynasty, dated to 923 AD, found in 1995. It is a tomb relief, marble with remains of colored painting, now in the collection of province of Hebei Archaeological Institute. The relief depicts an orchestra of ladies who are engrossed in playing different kinds of instruments. At the bottom left, two females are shown dancing. Some instruments are being held by the ladies, and few of them have a support of small stools. A single male seems leading the orchestra. The hairdo is typical, each having a separate style with tufts of hairs tied upward, and to decorate them, flowery bows are attached. As the painter grew more proficient in rendering of action, it was Chang Seng Yu, an early 6th century artist, who used the technique of illusionistic shading to give plasticity to the forms of painting, which was introduced to China from the West. He did wall paintings for Buddhist temples. Another innovation of Chang Sheng Yu probably also of Western derivation, was a more fleshy figure type. A 9th century writer characterizes the great early figure painters by saying that Ku Kai Chi captured the souls of his subject. Lu Tan Vi, a 5th century master, their bones, and Chang Sen Yu, their flesh. A well-known hand scroll attributed to Chang Sen Yu was the 5 planets and 28 constellations. It is a section of a hand scroll, ink and colors on silk, and at present in the Osaka Municipal Museum. It exhibits both the technique and shading and an increased corporeality in the figures. The Chen Hsing, the planet Saturn, is portrayed as an emaciated old man seated cross-legged on the back of an ox. The dark tone of man's skin, along with his large nose, bulbous forehead, are common Chinese conventions for representing holy men of India and other Western lands. The long period of division of the empire ended when in 589 China was reunited under a single dynasty, that is the Sui. But by the end of the century, revolts had broken out again, and in 618 the Sui was overthrown by a new dynasty, the Tang, which lasted nearly 300 years. Buddhism, which had been imported from India as early as the Han dynasty, was stronger than ever before or after. The achievements of the Tang dynasty in figure painting can be observed in the paintings painted by anonymous painter, portrait of the scholar Fu Sheng. It is a 9th century section of a hand scroll, ink and color on silk, and at present in the Osaka Municipal Museum. In the painting, the short, deft strokes define withered skin of Fu Sheng's arms, the bony structure of his sunken chest, the wrinkles in his neck, the expressive lines on his cheeks and brow. The painting has been ascribed to the great Tang poet-painter Wang Wi, who was active from 699 to 759, who is more celebrated for the development of ink monochrome landscape than for his figure painting. While the portrait of Fu Sheng is not in monochrome, the coloring subdued, limited to tints of red along contours for the flesh and light washes elsewhere. Fu Sheng was a Confucian scholar who took part in the early Han Dynasty revival of classical learning, in which scholarship attempted to repair the losses it had suffered through the infamous burning of the books. He produced a copy of the Book of Documents and devoted the short remaining period of his life to transmitting his understanding of the text in a series of expository lectures. In the painting, he is portrayed as delivering one of these, holding the scroll in one hand and pointing with the other to a difficult passage. Artists from mid-Tang period onward came to rely even less than before on color, more on descriptive and expressive power of brushline alone. Wu Taozu, name of whose work survives even in reliable copies, uses only thin washes of color or none at all. The more conservative artist, however, continued to draw in fine lines with bright pigments was Zhang Hussain and Chou Fang, specialized in pictures of palace ladies, both who worked in the 8th century. Chang in the first half and Chou in the second half of the 8th century. At least 2 works of Chang Hussein are preserved in copies. The best known section of a hand scroll is titled Ladies Preparing Newly Woven Silk, which in early 12th century was copied by Emperor Huitusung. Ink and colors on silk, and at present in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. An everyday scene in the women's quarter of the palace is idealized and turned to the evocation of a quiet mood. 2 women stretch a bolt of silk between them. Another irons using a metal pan filled with burning coals. A girl holds the opposite edge of the cloth. A younger one, too small to be of any help, runs underneath. While there is still a certain static quality to the scene, some movement is convincingly suggested in the attitude of the lady ironing and in the off-balance pose of one further left, repeated by the even more unstable figure of the child. The occupations and amusements of court ladies was also subject fondly rendered by Chou Fang, master of palace scenes. In the small picture, ladies are shown playing double sixes again. This is a 8th century scroll, ink and colors on silk, and at present in the Freer Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. The arc-shaped placement of the woman surrounding the 2 central figures impart a sense of importance to the woman's insequential activity. Another painting attributed to Chou Fang is the court ladies wearing flowers in their hair. It is a hand scroll, ink and color on silk, belonging to Tang dynasty and at present in the Liaoning Provincial Museum, Shenyang. Typically shown in a variety of poses in frontal and the 3/4 view seen from both front and back, the women in these paintings are much more robust in appearance than the wispy court ladies seen in compositions from 6 dynasties.